All right, so let's jump into our first lab. It's going to be accessing and preparing the data. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at the data set. So if you look inside of your dyad folder, there's a folder called data. And within that folder called data is various other folders. One that has international sales that we'll be importing. We've got different themes in here that we'll be taking a look at as well. And then we've got the US sales. And within US sales, we've got two files. Now, please don't click on the sales.csv file. I've got a sample of that. That file is a comma separated value data set, but it has over 4 million records in it. And if you try to just double click on it and it opens it in Excel, it could slow down your machine. So here's what the actual CSV file looks like. As you can see, we've got product IDs, date, zip, units, and revenue, and they're just, those values are separated by a comma. We've also got an Excel spreadsheet in there called BI Dimensions. And this Excel spreadsheet has 3 tabs. There's a product tab, which is a similar type of data structure that we were seeing with the CSV. We've got the manufacturer tab. Now, this is not structured in any normal way that you would easily be able to pull into a data set or pull into a database, but we will be able to transform this data so that it's easy for you to use within Power BI. And then we've got some geography information, and it as well is formatted similar to the CSV type file. So let's go ahead and jump into Power BI. And I'm going to do that by just double clicking the Power BI desktop icon on my, or the Power BI icon on my desktop. And what you'll see is the Power BI desktop starts to load. And it takes a few minutes to load, and then we'll get to the actual Power BI report page. So this is what Power BI desktop looks like, and this is the interface where you'll be building the majority of your reports. And I say majority because there is the ability to modify or build stuff within the Power BI service web interface, but the Power BI desktop is a much stronger application for doing that, and it's a purpose-built application for designing these reports. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at our data within Power BI. So we're going to import that into Power BI. So from the ribbon, which is this area at the top with the buttons, we're going to go ahead and click on Get Data. And Get Data is how you import data anywhere inside of Power BI service. And what I want to do is I want to get data from a text CSV file. So the first thing it does is it takes me to where I want to get the data. So I'm going to go to my dyad folder. And I'm going to go into the data folder, and I'm going to go into US sales. And at this point, I'm going to pull in just the sales CSV file. And then at this point, I can click open. So now Power BI is reaching into that file, and it's importing all of it into a data set here. So we can see that it's pulled in our data. It's only going to show us the first couple hundred rows because, like I said, that file has millions of rows in it. It automatically detected that it was a CSV file or that it was comma delimited. And it gives us a couple of options. We can just load the data straight away, or we can transform the data. We want to go ahead and click on transform the data. Oh, it opened on the other monitor. Give me 1 second to bring that back over. So this is the Power Query Editor. And this is how Power BI allows us to transform the data. And if you've used Power Query inside of Microsoft Excel, the interface will look very familiar to you, and you'll be able to pick this up pretty quickly. If you've never used it inside of Excel, then I would encourage you to learn how it works and use it there as well, because it's a very powerful transformation tool that allows you to manipulate your data. So we're inside of Query Editor, and we can see in here that Power BI has determined different data types. So we can see that it decided that the product ID was going to be numeric, and that the date, it said, hey, this is a date. It found the zip code. It determined that to be numeric as well, and then the number of units, and then what the revenue is. You can see here at the top of the column that it's decided that that's going to be a decimal number. And you can change those data sets by in a couple of different ways. And if you're following along with the instruction set, the first mechanism for changing that is to highlight the column. So they've chosen, or Power BI has determined that the zip file was a numeric number, but we're going to be pulling in international zips, so we need this number to be we need this not to be a number, because there are letters in other zip codes. So I'm going to go up to the data type, and I'm going to change this to text. And it's asking me if I want to replace or add a new step. I'm going to replace the current step. And now we can see that the zip code has been set to text. And the reason this is important even for US zip codes, if you're working with US zip codes, is you can see right here, some of our zip codes start with a 0. And if you've ever had to import numbers that needed to have the leading zeros in them into Excel, you know that it sometimes, once it sees a number, that leading 0 goes away. So changing that back to text is very important so that we can get the actual zip codes. So this is all of our sales data has been imported in. And we can see down at the bottom on the left-hand side that it's got 5 columns. There's more than 1,000 rows. It only does this first part on the first 1,000 rows inside of the Power Query Editor. And so let's pull in another data set. So at this point, we're going to go back up to within Power Query Editor. We do that by going, instead of get data, we're going to a new source. So what we want to do here is we want to pull in the Excel data. So I'm going to click on Excel, and our BI Dimensions XLS file, since it remembered what folder we had pulled our data in, and I'm going to click Open on that. So now we get what's called a Navigator dialog box, and the Navigator dialog box is going to show us our 3 sheets. We've got our product table, or we've got our product sheet, our manufacturer sheet, and our geo worksheet. We also have the product table. So if you remember on our source data inside of that worksheet, product details is actually inside of a table within Excel. So Power BI can know the difference between a worksheet and a product and a table, and it gives you what it sees for you to be able to choose from. So what we want to do is we want the product table, and now we can see what's in the table. If we click on product, it'll show us what's in the product worksheet as well. But we've got some additional information at the top. So we want to pull in the table, we want to pull in manufacturing, and we want to pull in geography. So we've got all of those selected. And then we want to go ahead and click the OK button. So now we've got 4 queries that are inside of our data set. We're starting to build our data model. So we'll be able to link this data together and pull good information out of it. So we've got another set of data that we want to get, and that is all of the international sales. And the international sales, if you remember looking inside of the data structure, international sales is actually a bunch of CSV files. Now, we could go in and pull these in one at a time, similar to what we did for the US sales, but there's a faster way to do that. So this time, we're going to choose a new source, and we're going to scroll all the way down to more, and it's going to give us a, if it comes up, Oh, there it goes. So now we're into that same type of get data that we saw earlier, but these are all the different types of data sources that you can get data from. Azure SQL databases, you can filter that down by specific database types, whether it's on Azure, online services, have a bunch of different built-in data. And then there's a bunch of other kind as well. So we're looking to get from a file. So, and then I want to choose the folder and click connect. So at this point, I'm going to browse to the folder path. And so I'm going to go into my computer and I'm going to go into the C drive and I'm going to go to that dyad folder and I'm going to go to data and I'm going to select the international sales folder as a whole. So I browse through my C drive into my dyad folder, into the data folder, and now I'm at international sales. And so I'm going to click OK, and it brings international sales in, and I'm going to click OK again. And so what we're looking at is these are the files, the 6 files that were in there. And it's giving us, you know, basic file explorer information about the file, when it was created and modified and things like that. And what we're going to do this time, whereas before we clicked on transform data, we're going to click on combine and transform data. And so Power Query is going to go through, look at the data sets, and it's going to come back to us with a suggestion on how to best combine these files together. So it's looking at it based on the first file. We already know that all of the files are the same, but if you wanted to, you can investigate through each of the individual files. So at this point, I can just click OK. And now Power Query, Power BI, is going to grab all 6 of those files, and it's going to bring them all in to a single file called International Sales, because that was the name of the folder. So now if we scroll through this particular list, and an easy way similar to Excel to see what's contained in a column is you can look for the look at the filtering of it, and I'm just going to tell it to load more, because you can see here from the amount of megabytes that it's going through with each of those files, there's a lot of data in there. So rather than just automatically bring it all in, Power Query will just give you the first 200 or 1,000 rows or something like that, and it give you the option to get more. So we can see there's all the countries that we expected actually exist in this table. And so now we've got all of our international sales in. The transformation happens automatically, but you can still get access and view all of the different steps. That's not as important to us right now. Just trust that Power BI brought the data in as we would expect the data to come in. So we've got international sales here, and Power BI has done the same thing. It's gone through each of the columns and made determinations about what it should be for data types. Again, it did the same thing with zips. So where it made the zips numeric values or whole numbers rather than text values. So we want to change that to a text value. And it's going to give us the same message that we want to replace the current step, because on the right-hand side over here, we have applied steps. And so we can actually go back and see what each of the steps that were taken, whether they were steps that you created or steps that Power BI took on your behalf, we can see all of the steps that had happened in the transformation of the data. And we can go back in and change those and delete those. So if we look in this drop-down right here, we can see that these transformations happened. We'll get a little bit not so much deeper into the transformations here, but I just wanted to point out that you can see everything that's happening to the data, and you can change each of those individual steps that are happening to the data. So we've changed the data type of the zip, and international sales, in pulling in that folder, Power BI also gave us a source name for which particular file a piece of data came from. excuse me. So we don't need the source name. So if we highlight the source name and we can then, on the home screen of the ribbon, there's the option up here to remove columns. So I can go ahead and just say I want to remove the columns, and it removed the column that was highlighted. If I accidentally chose the wrong one, you can see here on the right-hand side, if I go back to the applied filters, then, applied steps, we can see their source name column is still there. We've done a step to remove it. If we need that column back, I can just delete that step and my column is back. Another way I can remove the column is I can just right click on it and I can choose remove. And so now we've removed our source column as well in two different ways. So now I want to explore how we can transform some of the data a little bit more. So if we highlight the transform files from international sales, again, like we've gone back in there, and we navigate to the I'm sorry, I already talked about that part. So if we look at our sales query and we click on view, we can see the properties on the right-hand side of our particular sales query. And what we want to do is we want to make the naming convention a little bit more consistent. So I'm going to rename sales to sales with a capital S. And if we look at the product table by clicking on it under queries, and we look at properties on the right-hand side, I don't want that to be product table. I'm just going to have that be named product. And then I'm going to do something similar for manufacturing or manufacturer. And for consistency's sake, I'm going to make that a capital M so that we've got manufacturer capitalized. Geo, as you've heard me probably struggle just saying the word geo, we want to change that to geography. And then international sales is going to get a space in between international and sales. That way we've got a cleaner, easier to read set of queries that we can then work through. So it is a best practice to provide descriptive query names and column names because these are the names that we used in the visuals and in the Q&A sections of Power BI. So if you have a name that makes sense, a lot of times your data will come in, and if it's coming from Oracle, it'll be like, it could be OEB underscore something, something, something. You want names that are more human readable so that the AI can then build the insights against this data, and you can ask the AI questions about those insights using more human readable names. So as we're looking at our data here, we know that some of the data is not in the right format, and Power BI provides extensive transformation capabilities. So let's take a look at product. And if we notice here, categories isn't completely filled out. And that's because it was kind of a header type. So we've selected product query on the left-hand side, and I'm going to highlight the category column by clicking on the header. So now I've got product selected and the category column selected. And then on the transform ribbon, by selecting at the top, I want to go ahead and click on fill. Here it is, a little hidden. So I'm going to click on the fill button on the transform menu, and I want to fill down. So you'll see here what Power BI has done, or Power Query in this instance, is it's filled all of those null values with the value that was before it in the list. So now we've got all of our categories actually filled in instead of having those null values. And so that's just a simple way to complete your data set so that you can have good data for building your reports. And so if we look at the product column, we can see here that the product column has what appears to be some product information concatenated with a pipe delimiter, and it's got some other information after the actual product. So what we want to do is we want to split this out. So again, make sure you have the product query selected on the left-hand side, highlight the product column, and then on the ribbon, again, in Transform, we want to click Split Column. So here's the Split Column button, about halfway in the middle, and when I click on that, I want to split column by delimiter. And then we'll get the split column by delimiter dialog box. And the delimiter that we have in that column is a pipe. And the pipe is just above the enter key. So we've got our pipe selected, or our pipe selected inside of the split column by delimiter. And at this point, if I click OK, so now we have product.1 and product.2 because, yes.
We have a question here from Simon. And
okay.
Was null a blank, or did the data imported say null when filling, when you were filling?
The null was blank. The data didn't say null.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So at this point, we've now split our product, and we have split our product column, and we split it into the actual product name. So I'm going to rename that column. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm just going to select Rename. And we want this field to be just the product field. So now we've got our product field, and you can see on the right-hand side, the applied steps has been added. So we've renamed a column, and we're going to rename product 2, same way, right-click, rename. And this is, we're going to call this segment. So now we've split our data out. We've got product, we've got segment, we've got categories, manufacturer ID, we've got our prices, and we've got a unique product ID. So at this point, we look over here to price, and we want to be able to run calculations against the price, and that's going to be a little bit difficult with the USD in there, because you can see that Power BI decided that this was going to be a text field because it has text in it, and it's not all just numbers. So we want to make sure that we're selected on product again. We want to make sure that we're working within the product query, and this time we're going to add a column. So in the menu across the top, I'm going to click on Add Column, and I'm going to add a column from examples. And I'm going to go ahead and choose from all columns. Now, you'll see here that the interface has grayed out, so we're focused on just what we're doing and just what we're working with. So how building a column from example works is we're going to type in information that we want to extract. Power Query is going to go find that information and help us with that extraction process. So we've clicked on Add Column. We're getting it from all columns. In this first row right here, what we want to do is enter the $412.13. $412.13. So you can see here that Power BI went out, searched through all of our columns and said, hey, here's where that value is, and has said, this is where we're going to get it from. So I'm going to rename this because I clicked on the header. So I want to double click that. So I double click that because I want to rename that to MSRP. So now I've renamed that to MSRP. And after I hit enter, when I entered the 41213, it went down to the rest of the price columns and it said, hey, I know what you're looking to do here. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of that for you. So at this point, I can click OK. And now what we've got is we've got an additional column, because that's what we were telling Power BI to do. And it has just the price in it without the dollar amounts. So the MSRP field defaulted to text because that's the type of field that it came from. So we want to change that to a fixed decimal number. And I'm going to click on the data type at the top. And I'm going to change that to a fixed decimal number. So now we've got MSRP as a fixed decimal number. So we don't want to lose the currency information. So let's go ahead and do a similar process again. We're going to add another column. And we're going to add column from examples. We've got our same format here. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and enter in US dollars, similar to what we did with the number part of it. And now, come on, let me delete the other part out of it. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this one to be currency. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now we've got two additional columns that we've created, an MSRP column, which has our prices in it, and a currency column, which has our currency in it. And so now that we've split out the MSRP, we don't need the price column anymore because we've already captured that information in another way. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and choose remove on the price column. And now we've got our product IDs, products, segments, categories, manufacturer ID, MSRP, and currency split out. So we've taken that product table out of the Excel and we've transformed it in such a way that it'll make it easier for us to work with this data inside of our visuals. So let's take a look at the geography column. Or I'm sorry, the geography query. So first we'll notice that the first two rows are informational. They're not really part of the data. So similarly, in the manufacturing query, the last couple of rows are not part of the data. So let's remove them so we have a clean data set. So with the geography query selected, we're going to go to the home ribbon and we're going to click remove rows like we had done before. But this time we're going to remove top rows. And we're going to remove the top 2 rows. So I'm specifying how many rows to remove from the top, and I'm telling it 2 because we've got these last updated, and we've got a row that didn't have any values in it. So I click OK. And now we've removed those top 2 rows. So at this point, we see here this first row has column headers. So again, from what we want to do is we want to promote those as row headers. So with the geography query, again, selected on the left-hand side, and the home ribbon, we want to click on use first rows as headers. It's the third column from the right. So we want to use first rows as row headers. And so now Power BI has gone ahead and promoted that first set of rows to row headers. It wasn't something that we had to do manually. And again, it added the step to the left-hand side or to the right-hand side under applied steps. So we could step back to where we had removed it, and then we promoted the headers. And then once we promoted the headers, Power BI went and looked through the data types and changed them to what it thought it was, because originally they were all text, because there was text values in there. So if we look at the zip column, again, it's set as a numeric value. And what we want to do is change that to text, just like we did on the other one. And we want to replace current. And so we'll give Power BI its thinking time. Oh, it's set to text. It didn't have to think. I'm used to it thinking a little bit during that step. So let's go ahead and take a look at manufacturer now. And manufacturer is formatted in some crazy ways that could be difficult to pull consistently into a report. So let's go ahead and from the home ribbon, we want to remove some rows. And if we're looking at the data here, we want to remove the bottom 3 rows this time. So let's go ahead and remove the bottom 3 rows by clicking on Remove Rows, and it's going to ask how many rows do we want to remove from the bottom. I click 3. So now we've got a little bit of a cleaner data set since we removed those 3 rows from the bottom. And our data would probably be easier to work with if we were to transform it. If we were to take it from being a bunch of columns to a bunch and transform it so that we see it as a bunch of rows. And so we've got manufacturer selected. And we can see here that the manufacturer ID, the manufacturer name, and the logo are the columns. So that'll be easy for us to transform by transposing those. So I'm going to click on the Transform ribbon, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Transpose. And voila, Power Query was very quick. It was a pretty small data set, so it simply made that transposition. So now we're looking at manufacturer ID, manufacturer, and where their logo is in a format that's going to be much easier to join into the sales table. So, and again, applied steps on the right-hand side. And we, at this point, are going to want to use the first rows as headers. So I'm going to click on Home, and I'm going to come back over to Use First Rows as headers. And again, now we've got headers, and we've got our data in a format that's super easy to be able to use inside of the visuals and inside of the actual report building. And again, applied steps on the right-hand side. You can see everything that you've done. You can go deeper into everything that you've done by clicking on the little gear icon. So if we want to look at the remove bottom rows, we can see this is the step that we actually did, and it can take us back to that actual step. So doing data transformation inside of Power Query, aside from being super easy to do, is also gives you every step that you've done. So you can try things out, and if it doesn't work and it doesn't provide you data in the way that you're expecting, you can just delete it and do something else without losing any of your previous steps or without having to go back and do something. So now that we've got the manufacturer table laid out, so let's take a look at, we've got international sales and we've got sales. And if we look at these two, we've got 5 columns inside of sales, and it's product ID, date, zip, units, and revenue. If we look at international sales, we've got product ID, date, zip, units, revenue, but we also have country. So we're going to want to do a little bit more transformation, and we want to combine those so that we're working with a single sales table rather than having to try and fuss around connecting with multiple sales tables. So the first thing we're going to need to do is make sure that all of our columns are the same. So I'm going to click on the sales query, and from the ribbon, I'm going to go to Home, and this time I'm going to click Append Queries. All the way to the right in the column second from the right. So I'm going to choose Append Queries, And the append queries dialog box is going to open up. Now we have the option of appending 2 tables or appending 3 or more tables. We're just going to do this with 2 tables right now. And the drop-down list tells us right now we're currently selected sales. What table do we want to append to the sales table? So I'm going to choose international sales and click OK. So now we're looking at the sales table and we see that there's a new column that's been added because that column came from the international sales table. But since regular sales didn't have any value, it's just populated as null. So we've taken our international sales table or query and we've appended it to the sales table or query. And now we've got the new column that has been automatically added. So again, if we do the same thing and we look at the drop-down list and we load a little bit more, we can see that our other countries, as soon as this finishes loading, we can see that our other countries have been added in, but USA isn't there as a country. USA is showing up as null. So what, there are a couple of different ways you could populate that. You could use a fill or you could do other types of things. What we're going to do to populate that is we're going to add another column that pulls in what that value should be. So we're going to go again to the Add Column ribbon at the top. And we want to add a conditional column this time. So conditional column is the first option under Add Column. And we want this new column name to be country name. So I'm naming it country name. And if we look at the column name dropdown, I'm going to say if the country name equals, and here's our different options, and if our country name equals the value null, then we want our output to be USA. And then down under else, we're going to change it from just hard coding a value to selecting a column. And we're going to choose the country column. So what I've built right here is some conditional data manipulation, whereby if the country equals null, if the country is null, then put the value as USA. Otherwise, or else, just put the value of the country field in. And so at this point, I'm going to click OK. And now we've got a new column called country name, and you can see that USA is populated. And we can trust that the rest of it is populated. We don't need to wait for it to load again. So now we've got our new country name column, and so we can get rid of our original country column. Again, I'm just going to highlight it, right click, and click remove. And now we've got a single table that has all of the sales, international sales, and USA sales together. So at this point, let's go ahead and rename this from country name, since it was just a temporary file or a temporary column name, and we'll rename this back to country. And we're going to want to change this to just straight text. There's another way to do that. We can use the home and then the data type, and we can change it to text. Again, it does the same thing as clicking on the actual data type for the column, but there, as I said, there are multiple ways to do each of these steps. So I'll try and show you a bunch of different ways, and you can use whichever ones are easier for you. And let's take a look here. Let's change revenue. Let's go ahead and change revenue to fixed decimals. And all right. So now when the data is refreshed, when we pull new data in, all of these applied steps are going to happen for each of these different types of queries. And you'll end up with your data automatically being transformed in these different ways every time that a refresh happens. So let's go ahead and click this drop-down list. Let's go ahead and populate this so that we can see that populating. All right, so now we can see that rather than having a null, we've got USA in there. So what we want to do at this point is we want to keep international sales from, so we've appended the international sales data to the sales query, so we don't need the international sales table to load into the Power BI data model that we use when we're building the reports. So in order to prevent that from happening, since the data already exists in sales, we can right-click on international data and we could tell it to not enable load. And so now you'll see that international sales is highlighted, or I'm sorry, international sales is in italics, and that's to give you a visual indication that international sales isn't going to be loaded into the set of data that you'll be using to actually build the report. So at this point, let's take a look at some of the stuff that we've done here. Under View, we can go under the View ribbon at the top. We can look at Query Dependencies. And what this shows us is it shows us what queries depend on what. And what I've done is just made it a little bit bigger, and I'm just, with the bottom right-hand side, I can make the layout bigger, and then I'm looking at it. So we can see where the data comes from all the way through the process. So we can see here that our sales data and that is dependent upon a particular file, the sales.csv file, as well as the international sales file. So it shows us, okay, where did each of this particular set of data come from? And so if you're getting a Power BI report that you're working on for somebody else, or if you're not 100% sure, you can always go up and view the query dependencies to get a better idea of exactly where all of the data comes from. And another way you can do that too is, like, if we're looking at our sales table and you click on the very first step, the very first step tells you where the particular data is coming from. If it was coming from a database, you'd see a connection string here, not with any usernames and passwords or anything, but just, you know, the connection strings into the data set. All of the queries, their very first step tells you exactly where the data comes from. And that's why it was important for you guys to put your dyad information in the particular dyad folder. Because as we get into the later query or the later labs, if we need to use one of these pre-built, it's hard-coded in there. And there are ways to parameterize that so that you could pull from different sources and stuff like that, but that's a little bit more advanced than we're going to cover in this particular lab. So at this point, we've got our data pretty much how we want it to be. The final step is to go ahead and click Close and Apply under the Home menu. So I click Close and Apply, and now the Power Query Editor window closes, and Power BI Desktop is taking everything that we've done in there, and it's pulling the data into a data set that is available to us inside of the Power BI Desktop. And so it's going to take it a little bit. It's going to run through all of that. Don't be alarmed. Sometimes it takes quite a while to load this when you're doing a refresh. If you're pulling from various different places, if you got 5 or 6 different data sets, that you're pulling from SharePoint, local files, queries out in the cloud. It could take a few minutes to run through all of this. This one doesn't take very long, but we'll go ahead and let it finish. As it does the load. And you can see under sales that there's quite a bit of data that comes in from that one particular CSV. It's I think it's just over 4 million records for the US sales, and then when you add international sales, it gets pretty sizable on there. But you can see here under, as the applied query changes are happening, international sales isn't part of the process that's being pulled into the Power BI desktop application, but the individual files are. So you see that it just switched from US sales to Australia. It's pulling in those individual files as part of the data refresh of the sales folder, or I'm sorry, the sales query. That's why we didn't need to add that international sales table or query into our Power BI desktop side. And as you continue to build Power BI, reports and you start working with it, it'll become a little bit more clear what needs to be inside of the Power BI side versus being inside of the Power Query aspect of it. All right, so it's finished loading in. On the left-hand side of the Power BI desktop, this is the pane that gives, or this is the option that gives us our canvas. We've also got the option to look at the actual data. So here we're looking at our geography data, and on the right-hand side, it's which table that we're looking at. And looking at geography in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see it's got 176,000 rows. If we look at manufacturing, it's got the 14 that we had done. If we look at product, we've got 2,400 products that have available to us. And if we look at sales, we've got 7.2 million sales rows within the data set for the various countries. Excuse me. And so again, here we can click on the drop down and we can see that all of our values are available to us. And the primary reason for that is that when you're working inside of Power Query, it's pulling directly from the files that are on the hard drive or wherever they're at, pulling the data directly in each time it needs to do a refresh. So when you're doing that and you go to click on one of the drop downs, it has to go out and pull all that information to summarize for that drop down. Inside of Power BI Desktop, all of the data is loaded into the Power BI data model already. And so all of that is in memory for the instance of Power BI Desktop that you're using. So it has that drop down information immediately available to it. So that is the primary aspects of pulling data into Power BI and Power BI Desktop. Now, our last step is we want to definitely click File and we want to save. And you can save that either inside of the actual dyad folder is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call mine Lab 1 and I'm going to save. And now it's going to live inside of that actual folder. Try not to save it in your reports folder inside of the dyad folder, because those are where if you didn't quite make it this far following along, when we start Lab 2, we're just going to start with the Lab 1 file when we get there. And one final note is if you click on Help inside of Power BI, you can get to Power BI documentation. You can get to examples of Power BI. You can load various external tools. You can get to the Power BI blog. The important thing that I would recommend everybody do, not necessarily right now, but after the class, is if you're going to develop Power BI reports and you're working with Power BI reports, go ahead and join the Power BI community. And when you click on that, it'll take you directly to the Power BI community. and it'll take you directly in. To be perfectly honest, I find the majority of my answers from the Power BI community. It's a wonderful place. So many people who are just super eager to help and show off what they can do. And if it's a Power BI related question, go there, ask it, and they'll usually get an answer to you pretty quickly. All right, so at this point, we've completed Lab 1. So at this point, we're going to start Lab 2. And Lab 2 is where we're going to start exploring the data. We're going to select data elements. We're going to sort them. We're going to filter data. We're going to leverage cross-filter capabilities. We're going to drill into and across the data set. We're going to pivot and slice the data. So at this point, let's go ahead and get started with data modeling and exploration. So as I had mentioned before, the reason that we saved our Lab 1 outside of our reports folder is that our reports folder has all of the lab solutions in it. So I'm going to start Lab 2 with the file inside of the reports folder for Lab 1. And that way, and if you didn't get a chance to make it all the way through, or you were having errors or issues, we can address those differently. But to continue on with the labs, we can, if we all just start with the Lab 1 solution for Lab 2, then we'll all be on the same page and be able to work through it. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just double click my Lab 1 solution. And we're going to let Power BI launch. Oh, I have my other Lab 1 still open, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. Power BI can be a little bit of a resource hog on your machine, so I try not to have more than 1 or 2 Power BI reports open at a time. And there are things that you can do with how the report and how Power BI itself works. Again, a little bit too detailed for us to go into at this point. You're better off just closing the other Power BI reports that you may have open and working with the file specific for the lab that we're working on. So we're looking at Lab 1 solution, and as we had noticed on or made mention earlier, we've got on the left-hand side, we've got different tabs that we can go to, with the default one being the report. And this is the canvas where you actually build the report. We can click on the data tab, and again, we can see all of our data in here, and it looks just like what we were looking at before, what we had built in the previous with our data. And then we've also got a model. And this is where we can see how the different data sets are joined together in a way that Power BI has thought about them. So we can see if we mouse over the link between manufacturer and product, that Power BI recognized that manufacturer ID and manufacturer ID were joined together. And product ID and product ID from the sales table to the product. It hasn't done geography yet because it hasn't really quite been able to figure that out. So if I go back to our main canvas or the report page, across the top, we've got different ribbons. We've got an insert ribbon, and that allows us to insert shapes and different types of text boxes or a new visual. We've got a modeling tab, and this ribbon enables additional data modeling capabilities, so we can create measures and we can add columns to our data set from here. All of our data transformation doesn't need to take place in Power Query. We can do additional data transformation inside of the Power BI desktop app as well. The View tab allows us to, we can hide or show the filter pane. There are other things that we can do within the View tab. And then Help is, like, again, that super important place to go. If you're having questions, if you're wanting to see different examples, Help provides all of that. And then there's an External Tools tab that as you get into more advanced data modeling, you can link Power BI into additional tools that can give you other ways to work with the data. So yeah, and then on the left-hand side, like I said, we've got those three additional tabs to look at the data. On the right-hand side, if we're looking inside of the reports, if we're on the Reports tab looking at the report canvas, we've got filters on. It comes on by default, and you can shrink that down and make it bigger if you need to. And then we've also got the Visualizations panel, and we've got the Fields panel. The Visualizations panel allows you to just click on a particular type of visualization and add it. If you have a visualization and you want to change it to another type, you can click on it. And then when you have a visualization highlighted, this is where you interact with the properties of that visualization. The Fields window on the right is where you see the list of tables which you that were generated from the queries, and we can click a down arrow and get to the individual columns that we're going to be working with. So if we click on data, if we go back into our data on the left-hand side, and we expand the sales table by just clicking on it, and we can see the individual columns on it. And we can scroll up and we can scroll down and view the different data. There is over 3 million rows in this particular table. And if we see, you can see how easy it is to scroll through the data, though scrolling through that many rows can be a bit of a problem. So let's go back into model, and we saw the different relationships that are there. Now, Power BI can support, I'm double clicking on, it can support many types of relationships, or it can support 3 types of cardinality in the relationships. We can do many to one, one to one, one to many. Many to many is its own special sort of thing that will rarely be used, but it is supported in there. And let's start taking a look at how our data works together. So I'm going to cancel out of here and click back on the report. And I'm going to add just a clustered column chart. Now, if you hold your mouse over the different types of visualizations, you can see what different types there are. And the third one from the right, I'm sorry, the fourth one from the left, I guess that's the same, is the clustered column chart. So if I click clustered column chart, we can see here that it's been added. Here's the visual. I can click and drag it around. I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller. So here's a clustered column chart. And what we need to do next is we want to add fields to it. So if I expand geography as it already is, and then let's go ahead and add the country field. So I click country, and it's added the country field. And you can see here under visualization, it's added the country field as the axis. And I'm going to go ahead and expand the sales table, and then I'm going to click on revenue. And we can see here that revenue was added to the values table. So we've added 2 sets of data to our visualization, but if we notice that the revenue of each country is the same, and that's because we don't have a relationship between geography and the individual country. So if you see something like this and you're like, well, everything shouldn't be the same, it could be that the relationship hasn't been created between the 2 tables that you're using to pull the data from. So at this point, I'm going to go into the model on the left-hand side, and our sales data is by zip code, and we've got geography by zip code. And if I try to drag those over, it's just going to tell us here that it's a many-to-many relationship. Like I was saying when I was pointing that out earlier, many-to-many relationships are kind of difficult to get the data to behave in the way that you would expect it to be. So what we need to do is we need to structure our data in such a way that we can get the geography table and the sales table to link together. So what we're going to do is we're going to concatenate the zip code and the country columns to create a unique field value. because we can see that we've got our sales country and we've got our zip, and we've got country in the geography, and we've got zip as well. And so when the many-to-many relationship, there's just many of one sales values that could link to many different geography values, and so that's why it can't create that relationship. So we're going to create a new column, and we're going to do that by creating we're going to create a new column. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that column in both the geography table and the sales table so that we can combine those zips together. So if we go back to the report view, and if we're in the sales table on the right-hand side, as you mouse over it, there's a little tiny ellipse. It's kind of faded, but it's more options. And if we click on that ellipse, we can go ahead and choose new column. So now we can see in our bar at the top where formulas will go, we've got it started the stub of something, and we want to create that column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the name that it started with, and I'm going to name the column zip country. Now it's important that we name them the same in both, so that Power BI can easily link them together. And what I want to do is I want to start typing sales, and I'm going to, with the code assist that it's showing me, I'm going to choose sales zip. So what we're writing right here is we're writing what's called a DAX query, and it's the DAX programming language. And if you're writing a lot of Power BI reports, you will need to get used to this. It's pretty simple. It's similar to writing formulas in Excel, but it's not the exact same syntax. A lot of it carries over, but some of it is a little bit different. But it is pretty straightforward and simple. So I'm going to say I want to take my sales in zip, and I'm going to use the ampersand to say I want to combine that with something, and I want to combine it with any text that you want. I'm choosing a comma so that we can get a field that has the zip code, comma, and then the country. And I want to, left out an ampersand, because now I want to say join this together or concatenate this together with the sales. And you can see the code assist is narrowing down what it is that I could possibly choose when I start typing. So now I've got zip country equals sales zip and comma and sales country. Oh, I clicked outside of there, so you can hit enter, click outside of it, and now it's going to go ahead and build this zip country. And if we see inside of our sales table on the right-hand side, we've got zip country as a field that's been created. If you get an error right now when you're trying to do that, make sure that the data type for zip is text, because it can't concatenate a numeric value like that. So if you're still working off of your own file, you may need to go back and set the data type to be text for the zip. So there's other ways that we can do this same type of process. So at this point, we're going to add zip country to geography. And so I'm highlighting the geography field. I'm sorry, the geography table. And under table tools, at the top, the table tools ribbon, I'm going to go ahead and choose new column. And so now we're in the same place as we were before. And you could also do that from the modeling. Like I said, there's multiple ways to get there. And so we want to put in the same formula, zip country equals, but this time we want to make sure we're pulling our zip and country from the geography table. So I'm going to start typing geography, and I'm going to pull in geography zip, and again, ampersand to concatenate it, because we want the data to be identical between the two tables so that they can be linked together. I'm going to do an ampersand and geography. spell it correctly, and go with geography, country. And at this time, I'm going to hit enter. And now, excuse me, what we have is we can look in the right-hand side, and we've got zip country in our geography table, as well as zip country in our sales table. So we've got zip country in geography and zip country in sales. Now that we've created something that can link the two tables together, I'm going to go back to my model. And inside of my model now, I've got zip country and zip country. And I'm going to go ahead and drag zip country from the sales into zip country in geography. And Power BI was like, oh yeah, I see how those join together. So I'm going to go ahead and allow that. And if we double click on the join, we can see that it's a many-to-one relationship, that there's a single geography value for many sales values. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now that we've successfully created relationship, the one next to geography is what indicates that it's on the one side of the relationship, and the asterisk on the sales side says that there's many. That gives you that visual indication, so you can quickly look at this and say, okay, I see what's going on here. So now I'm going to go back to my report, and our visual has already updated, so that now that we've made that join, we can see what the revenue is by country, because the geography table and the country table are joined together. So it shows the differences, and the chart is sorted by revenue. What we want to do is we can play with that. If we click on the ellipsis, and at your ellipsis, if your report is all the way at the top, maybe at the bottom. But if you click on the ellipse, and we go down to sort by, we've got two options here. We can see right now we're sorted by revenue, whichever has the highest revenue. We could also click on country, and now we're sorted by country, and we're sorted by country in ascending or descending value. So I'm going to switch that back to revenue, and let's add manufacturers to this. So what we're going to do is we've got our visual highlighted, and from the manufacturer table, we're going to click on manufacturer. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger so we can read the names. We're going to click on manufacturer, and I'm going to add manufacturer and drag it over to the legend. And so now we're looking at by country, by manufacturer. If I take manufacturer out, we're looking at it just revenue by country. But if we bring manufacturer into the legend, now we've got manufacturer or revenue by country and manufacturer. So we can see the visual. And one of the cool things that you can do inside of Power BI is you're not limited to the visual that you originally chose. I usually start my visuals with a table and then decide on which type of other visualization I'm going to use later. So like if we go up and we choose a stacked column chart by just clicking on it, now our visual is in place, but we're looking at it as a stacked column versus looking at it as a clustered column. And you can choose whichever visuals work for how you've got your data set up, and you can just click on them to display a different type of a visual and see if that works better for your particular needs. So I'm going to expand the filters pane at this point, and so if the filters pane allows us to add filters, and you can see there's filters on this visual as well as filters on this page and filters on all pages. We're going to work within just the filters on this visual, but if you wanted to filter your report so that it only showed one particular year, you could add that filter to the report, and then your entire report will be filtered on that, and you can change that report wide just by making one change inside of the filters pane. So let's go ahead and expand manufacturer by clicking the drop down. And right now it's just default filtering and it has all of the different manufacturers on there. And we're going to change the filter type from basic filter to top N. And I'm going to go ahead and enter a 5 in right here, and I'm going to apply the filter. Oh, I suppose I should add the data fields. Let's add revenue in to the data field. So what we're saying right now is I only want to see the top 5 manufacturers by revenue. So at this point, I'm going to click Apply Filter. And now you can see that our chart only contains the top 5 manufacturers by revenue. So we've got the 4 other ones, and the one that we're primarily concerned with is Van Arsdale. So we're interested in the top 5 competitors by revenue. So we should probably just group them together so that we can just work with a group of the top 5 and work from there. So at this point, we need to clear the filter. And the clear filter is the little eraser icon. So I've cleared the filter. Now I'm looking at seeing everything. And we're looking at let's go back to our clustered column chart. So we're looking at our clustered column chart. And we erase the filter in the pane. So let's go ahead and right click on manufacturer. And we're right clicking on manufacturer, and we're going to create a group. So we're going to go with new group. And our new group dialog box is going to open up. And we want to add those 5 back into this particular group. So we want, and I am not very good at saying these names, so I am going to just click on the ones that we need to click on. So there's the first one, then there's what I believe is Surus, and I'm control clicking so that I can highlight multiples of them. We're going to do Natura and Palma. And so what we're doing is we're going to add the 4 or the top competitors into a single group, and then I'm going to click the group button. And we can see here that it's pulled those 4 over into a particular group, and I'm going to name that group top competitors. So top competitors. So what I want to do next is I'm going to click Van Arsdale, and I want Van Arsdale to be in its own group. And that particular group, I'm just going to leave it named Van Arsdale. And then down in the bottom right-hand corner under the Include Other Groups, that'll add Other. That'll add everybody else who isn't part of one of these groups. So what we've done here is we've created a group of Van Arsdale's top competitors. We've created a group for Van Arsdale and a group of others. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now under manufacturers, we've got a manufacturer group. So we've still got our stacked column chart, and we need to make sure that it's selected. So if you've clicked out where it's not selected, go ahead and click back into it so that you can get the properties of the visualizations. And what we need to do is we're going to remove manufacturer from the legend by just simply clicking the X. So now we're looking at just countries. And we're going to drag the new group that we created into the legend. And so now we've got 3 groups. We've got Van Arsdale, their top competitors, and all of the rest, as we can see for each of the countries. And now we're focusing on Van Arsdale, and the rest of them are grouped together in ways that can give us meaningful information about who our competitors are. So if we wanted to dive a little bit deeper, if I want to look deeper into this column, I can click Show as Table. And now what we're looking at is we're looking at our data, but Power BI is also showing us what the underlying data looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the report. Oh, sorry, let me go back into there. And I choose Show as Table. And then in the top right-hand corner, we can switch to a vertical layout where we can see the table that we're looking at on the right and the visual that we're looking at on the left. And then you can click back to report to get back to where you were within that report. So you can do that, show data as a table in most of the visuals, and it'll just give you a quick insight into what data makes up that particular visual that you're looking at. So let's create a revenue by manufacturer visual. So if we click on anywhere on the white space on the canvas, now we have nothing selected, and from the field section, we're going to click on the checkbox next to revenue for the sales table. So if I click on revenue, Power BI says, hey, this is probably a good visual for you to start with. And it just adds a visual because I've added a revenue value. And let's add manufacturer. Since we still have it highlighted, it's just going to automatically add the manufacturer. I'm going to resize this, get it out of the way, make this visual a little bit bigger for us to be able to focus on. And so I've added manufacturer, and then let's go ahead and change this into a tree map. There it is. So on the visualizations on the right-hand side, I'm going to choose tree map, and now we have a tree map of our data. It was just that easy. So in the tree map, if we click on Van Arsdale, notice that our other visual gets filtered by what we've clicked on in our revenue by manufacturer. So I can click on Van Arsdale, and now Van Arsdale is highlighted. If I click off Van Arsdale, the rest of the stuff gets back in focus. So click Van Arsdale, and it sort of grays out everything that isn't Van Arsdale. So this intersection between visuals, that's what's called cross-filtering. So it allows the visuals to filter each other. There's also another visual called a slicer that we'll get into a little bit later that lets you specifically filter everything together. But your visuals will interact with each other as you click on them. So we added the top 5 visual level filter earlier. Let's add a filter to the whole page like I was talking about so that we're only dealing with the top 5. Page level filters will apply to all of the visuals on this particular page. So at this point, we've got our filter page out, and we're going to drag manufacturing group, because that's what we want to work with is the various groups. And we want to drag it to filters on this page. So now we've got filters on this page, and we've got the filters on this page, and we want to filter to top competitors and Van Arsdale. So now we're looking at just a list of the top competitors, and we're looking at just a list of Van Arsdale. So our entire page is filtered to just the set that we want to look at. So what we want to do next is we're going to add a visual that provides sales information over time. And I'm going to go ahead and move this guy down, and I'm going to move this guy down, make him a little bit smaller, and I'm going to start by not having any visuals selected. And at this point, I want to, if we're going to be doing it over time, under sales, let's go ahead and add date. So you can see that Power BI has added a visual here for the year. And then we also want revenue on that. And so now we're looking at revenue within a particular date range. And if we look here in our axis, a date hierarchy has been created right here automatically when we added the date. And the Power BI automatically created that date hierarchy so that you can filter and you can drill in by the particular values of a date. And in Power BI, they refer to this as time intelligence, and you're able to add various date parts or remove them. If we don't want quarter to be in there, I can remove quarter as an individual element that we can then drill through. So if we click on, say, Australia underneath the revenue, we can see that it filters the rest of the visuals that are on the page. And if we look at revenue by country and we click the little filter icon, it tells us here what this is being filtered on. So there are filters on this table that is the manufacturer group is top competitors of Van Arsdale, which is our page level filter. If we look at the filters on the revenue by year, since we had clicked on Australia, we can see that Australia is one of the filters that's on our visual, as well as the page level filter. All right, so right now I've got revenue by country filtered, and I'm going to unselect it. So now we're looking at revenue by country. And from the ribbon, we're going to go up to Format, and we're going to click on Edit Interactions. So if you were looking at these, what was available to us, or the different options in the upper right-hand corner, we selected revenue by country, and we still got our filter. We can still do focus and things like that. But the other visuals have changed what's available to us there. Oh, this visual is on top. So there we go. Let's bring that back. So with revenue by country selected, you can see the other two visuals now have two different options here. And what this is going to allow us to do is determine whether we want a particular visual to interact with the others when we click on it. Sorry about that. I lost the audio. So what we see up here is we've got a we've got the filter options for both of these, and then we've got a highlight option, and we've got no interaction. And so if we don't want a particular interaction to filter a different visual, if you click on it, you can turn that off. And so now if I click on the USA, I'm sorry, you click on those to turn them on. So now when I click on, let's say Australia, and we click on Van Arsdale, we can see that the filters are, rather than just highlighting, it completely filters out what we were seeing there. And then if we click on highlight as well, then when we get the behavior that we had seen before, where we highlight the particular filter, but you can still see the other data. So let me go through that one more time. If you click on filter, then it physically filters everything else out of the other visuals. If you have highlight selected, then it just highlights that particular value. The third option is to not interact with it. So then if I click Australia, nothing changes about the other ones. The default is highlight, but you are able to change those as needed, depending upon what you require from that particular interaction. So we've already noticed that Van Arsdale has a large share of market in Australia. What we want to do is look at how they've done over time in Australia. So we're going to click on revenue by country so that it's highlighted. Actually, let's go out of edit interactions. We're going to click on revenue by country so that it's highlighted. And we're going to click on Van Arsdale for revenue by manufacturer. Oh, let's go ahead and remove the manufacturer group from the legend here. That's why I was clicking on that. So we're looking at just the revenue by country, and we've got a tree map to go ahead and select which manufacturer that we want to use. So if we click on Van Arsdale here, now we can see what the Van Arsdale revenue was by country, and we can see what the Van Arsdale revenue was across time. If we control click the Australian column in the revenue by country, and this is where, when you're working with Power BI visuals, control clicking becomes a pretty important concept that you have to just be, you do it and you'll get sort of used to it. So if you want to filter on multiple visuals, you need to use the control when you're clicking on the second visual. So right now I've clicked on Van Arsdale. I just unclicked. There's no selections going on in revenue by manufacturer. If I click, single click, I'm filtering everything on Van Arsdale. However, if I come over to Australia and click, it's going to unselect what I had selected in revenue by manufacturer and just select Australia. So
Hey, Butch,
in order, yes.
We do have two questions here if you have a minute.
Sure.
Sure. Jacob is asking if it's 2 filter interaction settings for each pair of visuals. Is that correct?
Well, each visual has interaction settings with every other visual on the page. So revenue by country has its own set of interactions between whichever visuals are on the page. If we have another visual that we add to this page, it'll have the same option. Those are down at the bottom here, as it does any other visual. So it's not paired specifically. But then if I click on revenue by manufacturer, now I've got the option of how revenue by manufacturer will interact with revenue by country. So it's the visual that you have highlighted when you're looking at the interactions. You can choose independent interactions for every other visual on the page. I hope that answers the question.
All right, thanks, Butch.
Was there another question?
He gave an example of settings for visual A lead to visual B, and setting for visual B leads to visual A. So I'll double check with him and make sure that his question was answered. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right, so we are filtering the charts with the control click. So when I click on Van Arsdale, I'm selecting Van Arsdale, but if I also want to select Australia, I need to hold down the Control key and click Australia. So now I'm filtered on both Van Arsdale and Australia. And that's like I said, play with it. You know, you're gonna using that interaction is both in Power BI Desktop and in the Power BI service. So we've got our chart filtered by Australia and we've got it filtered by Van Arsdale. And then if we want to see just 2019, we can see here that we've got our revenue by year. And if I control click 2019, now I'm looking at just 2019 data. And what we want to do is be able to drill in to that particular year. So one of the down arrows at the top is click to turn on drill down. So now I've got drill down capability built in. And if I click on 2019, I'm going to drill into, I undid my control clicks, but I'm now drilling in using the drill down feature into the particular year. And I can click into September, and now I'm looking at just the days of September. And the up arrow that's next to it will allow us to go up as well. And so that takes us back up to the year level. If we click on the split level icon, that'll take us straight down. I'm sorry, the split arrow icon. That'll take us down one level. So now I'm looking at the years and the months as they're combined together. And if I click that again, I'm going all the way down to the years, the months, and the days. And you can see we've got a lot of individual data there. If I take the up arrow all the way back and I use the two independent arrows, now I'm drilling into each row of the hierarchy without it being combined with the rest of the hierarchy. So that's getting used to how these arrows work. If you have a data set that you're working with or using this Van Arsdale data set, which is pretty simple, don't be alarmed if it takes you a little bit to work through how these particular buttons work together. That seems to be one of those points where, again, like the control clicking, it comes with practice. It's a new interface for most of us, and so it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to navigate those arrows. But it really does just take practice. So we've explored the data, and let's add an actual slicer at this point. So clicking outside of all of your visuals, choose the slicer from the visuals selections, and it's going to fill in whatever space you have. And let's add a list of manufacturers to that.
Hey, Butch?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for another question here? So just a quick question from Muhammad. He has a set of data in yearly and monthly, but when he selects 2020 and tried to sort, as I entered January, February, March, not 1, 2, 3, it doesn't sort. Also, he couldn't change the axis. An example, do you understand?
If he's trying to sort by name, there is a sort by option that we will be getting to later. If it's sorting just by alphabetical name, if it's the months, yeah. So there are more to sorting than just choosing which one that you sort by when you're talking about dates, because days of the week and how the months are named, it'll try to sort them alphabetically, so stuff will look kind of weird.
Great. Thanks again, Butch.
All right. So we're adding a slicer here. So I've added the slicer, and we want the slicer to be on the manufacturer. Additionally, I could have clicked on manufacturer and it would have added a field, and then I could have made it a slicer. And so what we've got here is we've got a list of of what the manufacturers are. And if we hover over, I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller. And if we hover in the upper right-hand corner and we select the type of slicer, it defaults to a list, but we can also have it be a drop-down. So now we've got a drop-down list of the various manufacturers. And if I click on Van Arsdale, now I'm looking at data that's just Van Arsdale. So the slicer has filtered everything on the page, similar to doing filters on the page slicer. Typically, you use the filters on the page if you want to control what the end user is going to be selecting. If you want the end user to be able to select what they slice on, then adding a slicer in is one way of doing that. So we've got our Van Arsdale. We've selected Van Arsdale from the drop-down list. And top competitors and Van Arsdale are still selected from our filters on the page, the manufacturing, and that so we're going to use the manufacturer slicer to analyze one manufacturer at a time. So if we click on the revenue by tree map filter, and this time we're going to change this to a card. So now that we've got the slicer, we don't necessarily need this revenue by manufacturer. So if we change this to a card by just selecting a card icon, now what it's giving us is it's giving us the revenue for that particular manufacturer. So if I change manufacturer to Palma, do I have something else? Filter. So the card visual gives us the revenue as we filter and cross-filter the other visuals. So if we have nothing selected, we can see that for all, we've got the 1.12 billion in revenue, and that all of the related attributes are in their tables except for date. So what we want to do is go over to the data view, and we want to click on by clicking on the data icon on the left hand, and then up in the ribbon where table tools are, we want to click on a new table. We're going to create a date table. So I'm going to click on new table, and a date table allows us to sort of drill into the dates a little bit better by giving us one date for each day as something that we can link to and allow the time intelligence to work a little bit better. So I'm going to create a date table, and I'm going to call this table date. Oops, I clicked out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and click new table again. And this is going to be a date table, and it's just going to be date. This is the name of it. And similar to how we created our column, we're just going to use DAX code, but this time we're going to use something called calendar. And that calendar is going to have a date that starts in 2012. So I'm using a date function to build a data type of date that can be fed into the calendar. So we're going to go from 2012, January 1st. So there's the year, month, day. It's going to be the start date. As you can see, it's giving us that that indication of where we're building things. And then we're going to build an end date, and that's going to be 2019, 12/31. And so now we've created our date, but we can see that the calendar is still looking for an end. So we're creating a table, and it's going to have all of the dates in it from January 1st of 2012 to December 31st of 2019. And so what we're using in here is we're using two DAX functions. We're using a calendar function, which takes a start and an end date. As you can see, when we click into the calendar, it'll tell us it takes a start and an end date, and then we're using a date function which builds a date from what you tell it to do. So we've created this. Now what we want to do is we want to highlight the date field in the date table, and under column tools, we want to change the data type to be date. So now we've got our data type as date, and now we can create the relationship between the newly created date table and the sales table. So here's our date table, and here's our sales table, and if we drag that over, we can see here, oh, it moved, it created it on country. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. And I'm gonna go from date to date. Or country one more time. Delete that relationship. Maybe I'll put these side by side to make it a little bit easier to drag over. Country seems to be jumping on me each time I drag. Let go. All right, so now we've got it linked. So we've got our particular sales, and we've got the various dates. So now we've created that relationship. And if we go back over to the report view, we can see that our revenue by date has gone a little bit crazy, because now we have those individual dates. And so if we highlight our revenue by date field, and we want to remove the date from the sales, and we want to use the date inside the date table. For the axis. So now that we have new date field behavior, it's similar to what we were seeing before. And let's go ahead and hide the date field in the sales table so that we don't actually grab it again accidentally. So I'm clicking on the ellipsis and I'm saying I want to hide. So now the date table that we created that allows us to manage all of the dates together and use built-in time intelligence is removed from the sales. And as we're doing that, we can go ahead and get rid of some of the other fields that we're never going to use as part of the visuals. So like the zip country field. We've already created that connection in there. We don't need to see it and have somebody accidentally put zip country on our report. So as we're looking at our different visuals, let's go ahead and make some more tweaks to the revenue by country visual. And let's add the state in from the geography table to below where we have country. So if we go to the geography table and we select state and drag it and just drop it under the axis where we have country, come on you. Now we've got state, and now you'll see that we've got drill down options similar to what we did by date. We can drill down into the various geography within our data. Let's go ahead and do the same thing to district. So now we can drill into districts as we were able to drill into the state. And with Van Arsdale selected, we can drill into Australia by turning on our drill down and then clicking on Australia. And now we're drilling into particular states and districts within Australia. And so we added that hierarchy to the axis to tell the visual, where do I go next if somebody clicks in here? Where do I go next? And so it takes that down to those so let's go ahead and drill all the way back up. so that we're looking at our countries, and we're going to disable drill mode by unchecking that. And so let's start looking at our product information. What we're going to do first is we're going to build a similar type of hierarchy, but this time we're going to do it inside of our product. So we've got a date hierarchy that has been built for us when we put dates in. And Power BI handles dates pretty much for you so long as you have something designated as a date table. We've got a revenue by country hierarchy that we built specifically with inside of this visual. And what we're going to do now is we're going to build a date or another type of hierarchy, but a product hierarchy that we can reuse over and over again. So from the product table being highlighted, we want to start with category. And so clicking on the ellipse next to category, we've got an option in here for new hierarchy. And so now we can see that we've got a category hierarchy, and the first value in it is category. And we don't want that to be category hierarchy. We want it to actually be a product hierarchy. So I'm going to go ahead and double click in there and rename it product hierarchy. So now we've got what we're calling a product hierarchy, and you see it reordered where it's going to be. And then the second piece of that is going to be the segment. So I'm going to click the ellipsis again, and I'm going to tell it to add to hierarchy, product hierarchy. So now we've got segment. It's still available to us on its own, but now we know that we've also added it to part of the product hierarchy. And we're going to add product to that hierarchy as well. So we're going to do the same process, click on the ellipse, add to hierarchy, product hierarchy. And so now we've got a product hierarchy. And it's got the priority of category, segment, and then product. So if we click somewhere in here so that we don't have, mouse, there we go. So if I click in a white space where none of the visuals are selected, I'm going to just click the checkbox next to product hierarchy. And we can see here that Power BI has decided, okay, this would look good as a table. So it created a table for us, and we can see that we've got our different product hierarchies as part of that table. And if you'll notice on the right-hand side that the complete hierarchy has been selected under the product hierarchy. So we want to enable drill down in the revenue by category chart by clicking on the drill down arrow. Oh, I skipped a step. So we want to add the revenue to this before we can do the drill down into the revenue. So from the sales, we're going to go ahead and just click on revenue. And now we can see here that we've got the values in our table are product hierarchy, and then we've got revenue in there as well. And we're going to switch this to a clustered bar chart. There we go, clustered bar chart. So now we can see that we've got our categories, and then we can drill into those categories by turning drill down on and selecting urban. So within urban, we've got the convenience, the modern, and the extreme that we had seen during the sample. We can turn drill down off, and we can go back up. And if I click on urban, we see that it's kind of hard to see that the other stuff has switched, but if I click on rural, you can see what a minuscule amount of rural is, but it's still a pretty sizable one in Japan. I'm sorry, in Australia. So now inside of revenue by country, if we click on Australia, we can see here that the urban revenue is just by Australia. And if we control click 2019, we're looking at urban for just 2019. And then if we turn drill back on and we click on urban, now we can see where extreme is actually showing us more than the other ones, similar to what we saw in the demo. So if we click 2018, now, and this is where control clicking comes in again. You control click those and you can see 2018 versus 2019. And we can actually drill down inside of both of these by turning drill down on and then clicking into 2019. We still got the quarters in there. I'm going to remove the quarters. So let me control click. So I've got 2019, and now we're looking at 2019 data. And then if you click up and just click, you'll undo the rest of the filters and you'll be back where you started. So at this point, we've got our at this point, we're going to add a matrix visual so that we can view the data in the rows and columns. So if we look at revenue by category and segment and such, we're going to change this from being just another graph to being a matrix. Now, the matrix, depending upon how your layout is, it's next to table, and before it's usually directly to the left of R. So we've now just changed this into a matrix. And what the matrix by default allows us to do is it allows us to navigate through the different categories and get that revenue that we were looking at seeing during the demo part. And if you click on the plus sign, you can expand it. So let's add a percent total to the revenue. So what we want is we want to bring in the revenue a second time as we've got our matrix, and we want, so we'll end up with two values that are in there. And under the newly added revenue value, the little drop down arrow, we've got different options on how we want to display that data. And it defaults to a sum, and we want to show that, but we can change it to showing the value as a percent of grand total, a percent of column total, or a percent of row total. And so we want to choose a percent of grand total. So just that easy, we didn't have to write a formula or do anything like that. We can see what each individual value is as a percentage of grand total. So with Australia selected, again, using the control to select Australia, and we can look at the extreme category for just 2019. We can see that it's 40%. If we control click and then control click 2018, we can see that it was 35%. Control click 2017, we can see that it was 38%. So it has been increasing up through 2019. And if we go back to our matrix visual and we're hovering over it and we go to the ellipse and choose a sort by, right now it's sorting by revenue. We're going to change that to percent of grand total revenue. And so now I'm going to control click 2017 to unselect it. And I'm going to control click 2019 so that we can select it. And we can see that we're sorted and our extreme category is at the top. So what we want to look at now is we want to add So earlier we created a calculated column named zip country. So now we're going to create a percent growth measure so that we can compare sales over time. And we're going to do this in 2 steps. So we need to calculate the difference, or we need to understand what the difference is between a measure and a calculated column. And a calculated column is evaluated row by row. We extend a table by adding a calculated column. A measure is used when we want to aggregate values from many rows in a table. So a calculated column only has a value that relates to what else is in that particular row, but a measure is used when we want to aggregate values from many rows in a table. So under the sales table, we're going to look at Table Tools, and we're going to click on New Measure. And so like we had added those columns before, this time we're going to add a particular measure. And this measure is going to be past year sales. So that's what I'm going to name it. And we're going to start with our first use of probably the most used function within all of DAX is the calculate function. And what the calculate function does is it evaluates an expression in the context of filters. So we want to calculate the sum of the sales revenue. That's what we want to measure inside of our measure. And we want to do this through the filter of same period last year. And you see as I start typing it, Code Assist lets me know what that does. And we want the same period last year to pull from the date table, date. So what we're asking the DAX to do is we're saying, hey, I want to calculate the sum of sales revenue, but I want you to go out and figure out what the same period that I have chosen for last year is and give me those values. So now I've created the PY sales for same period last year's, and we want to add that to our matrix table. So I'm just going to go ahead and highlight it, and now it's been added. Oh, nope, I didn't have it selected, and it created a new thing for me, a new visual. So make sure that your matrix is highlighted, and then choose PY last year. And now we can see that PY last year has been added to that visual. And I'm going to move it down so that we can add another value in. So we've added PY last year into that so we can see it. So we're going to create another measure. So under the sales table, make sure that the sales table is highlighted, and we're going to create new measure again. And we want to know what the percent growth is. So this measure, we're just going to call it percent growth. And this time what we want to do is we want to divide. So I'm using the divide function, the sum of last year, so the sum of sales revenue, minus past year sales. So I'm just going to put in PY, and it'll give me my past year sales measure. So I'm using one measure inside of another measure to do a calculation. And we're going to do PY sales again. Divide sum sales revenue minus past year sales. So let me find my missing parentheses. So I'm telling it I want to divide the sum of sales minus past year sales by past year sales. So that's what our formula is. And we use the divide function inside of DAX rather than just using a divide symbol, because it will handle divide by zeros and things like that for you.
Butch, could you repeat the formula for past year sales again?
The previous formula?
Yes.
Yeah. So the formula for past year sales is, and I brought it back up on the screen, is calculate the sum of sales revenue, and then I'll read it out. So it's going to be calculate, open parentheses, and then sum, SUM, open parentheses, and then you would choose the sales revenue, and then you would close the parentheses for the sum, and then there would be a comma, which is telling the calculate function, now this is what I want you to filter on. And it's same period last year, and then you would choose the date from the date table for that. And that's why we needed a date table, so that it could make these types of calculations. Without the date table, there could be missing data points if there wasn't sales on a day or things like that. This makes sure that we can use same period last year to go look at the exact same time frame last year, because we've got all of the days within that time frame.
Thank you.
Sure. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and add our percent growth to the matrix. I clicked on the matrix to make sure that we had it. And now we've got percent growth. And what we want to do here, since we've got our percent growth highlighted under Measure Tools menu at the top, we want to format that as a percentage. Did I turn it? Oh, it keeps going back. There we go. Oh, I was doing past year sales. I was highlighted on the wrong one. Turn that back to general. Make sure that I'm actually highlighting percent growth, and then set that as a percentage. There we go. So now we've got percent growth set as a percentage. And we can actually format the past year sales, so we can highlight it from the sales side, and we can format that as currency by clicking on the currency button under the Measure Tools ribbon. And now we've got past year sales formatted as a currency, and we can select and format it however we need to there. All right, so this finishes Lab 2. That one went a little bit over, to say the least. I'm going to start Lab 3 visualizations. In Lab 3, we're going to work exclusively within visualizations. Again, we want to, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and save my Lab 2 solution. And I'm going to save that as Lab 2. Not inside of my reports folder. Let Power BI save that. And then, again, I prefer that we start Lab 3 using the Lab 2 file. So if you go back to your Dyad folder and navigate into the reports and launch the Lab 2 solution, and as we're waiting for the Labs 2 solution to fire up, we can talk a little bit about what we're going to do with the visualization of the data. So we can experiment with visualizing the data in various different ways. We can enable previously inaccessible business insights, and we can select from a growing number of visualization types, different chart types, and we can use visualizations that go beyond standard charts, such as slicers, maps, tiles, and standalone images, things like that. And then with cross-filtering across visualizations, we can definitely surface new insights. Microsoft is also enabling developers to easily add custom visuals into Power BI for use in a dashboard, reports, and content packs. And to help you get started, they've published the code for all of the visuals in GitHub. So along with the visualization framework, they've provided a test suite and tooling to help the community build high-quality custom visualizations for Power BI. And all of this is available as an open source project on GitHub. So you can visit powerbi.com/visuals to go to the community and see the community authored visuals as well. So let's go ahead and get started in Lab 3. So this is the layout that we want to sort of have in place. If you're still working off of your old or working off of your own file, if you've been able to follow along and keep up, this is generally the layout that we want to see for starting Lab 3. All right, so the first thing that we want to do here is we want to select this matrix visual again, because we're going to add some pizzazz to it. So I've got the matrix visual highlighted, and we want to, on percent growth, we want to, under the value section, on percent growth, we want to use the drop-down arrow that's right here, and we want to do some conditional formatting. And what we want to do for the conditional formatting is we're going to adjust the background color. Come on, conditional formatting, background colors. And so now that the background colors dialog box has opened, we want to format by a color scale, and we want to base it on the field percent growth. It already put that in there for us. And we want to make sure that we click on diverging. So what we've got here is we want to format by a color scale, and there are other options that you can get into, various rules or field values. But we want to make sure that we're formatting by a color scale, diverging, and click OK. And so now we can see that they've come up with a color scale for us, and we can see callouts of particular values. Conditional formatting can also be based on another column using the color based on the drop-down menu. And so initially we had a filter that loaded 3 years of data. So what we're going to do now is we're going to load the complete data. So we're going to go to Home, and we're going to click on Transform Data, which is going to take us back into Power Query. And then on the date column, of sales, we're going to undo the filter. And so now we've got all of the data loaded in. And at this point, we can click Close and Apply. That wasn't a step that we had gone through when we were building that file, but it's something that is part of the provided files through the lab side of things. And so we need to go undo that so we're getting a full data set. So this time, all the data will load. It might take it a couple of minutes to pull everything in. What we want to do once it's finished is we want to make sure that we're selected on Van Arsdale as the manufacturer, and we're going to remove all of the rest of the filters. So let's give this just a minute. As it runs through and brings in all of the sales. It's working through them.
Hey, Butch?
Yep.
While this is loading, do you have a minute to answer a question for Nathan?
Sure.
He's asking, can you create true histograms where data is sorted into bins?
I believe that you can.
Awesome. We'll try and get more info on that. Thanks, Butch.
Sure. All right. So now that the data has finished loading, and we need to make sure that the report is filtered by Van Arsdale with the manufacturer slicer, which it is. And if we hover over the manufacturer slicer, in the top right corner, you can see an arrow. So we can change that to a list. And we're going to make that just a little bit bigger. And then in the visualization panels on the right-hand side, we're going to start looking into the properties of a particular visual. So if under visualizations, there's the fields list, and this is how you determine which field is going to be which part of the visualization. But then the paint roller icon is what gets you into formatting a particular visual. So if we expand general, as we're still highlighting on the slicer, and we change the orientation to horizontal and make the slicer just a little bit wider, and let's go a little bit wider that way. The slicer visual updates itself as we do that. Make it a little bit narrower. So now we've got all of our manufacturers just going across the top of the visual. And so we can click on Van Arsdale, and now we're looking at just Van Arsdale data. We can click on Purim, and now we're just looking at Purim data. So we want to keep selected on Van Arsdale, and we're done with the general section. So we can also add an option to select all. Under selection controls. Right now we're on single select is off. We can turn multi-select on where you can do it with control, where I can, if I want to look at 2 at a time, I can control click and see 2 of the selections at a time, as with the other visuals. But then there's also the option to show select all. So I could select all, or I could select none. as one of the options under selection controls. We don't need to really select all at this point, but I just wanted to make you aware of that being there. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and add some logos to the manufacturer of the slicer. So under the logo field section of manufacturer, we're going to click the logo. And then under column tools, we're going to change the data category. So we've got manufacturer logo selected, not clicked on, but selected. And our data category, we're going to change to image URL. So now we've got image URL selected as the data category, and that helps Power BI understand that as a URL so that it can just access the data. So now we're going to click on the manufacturer slicer, and from the field selection, we're going to put logo in replace the manufacturer column. So we're going to switch out, let me go back over to manufacturer, and we're going to switch out logo with manufacturer. And now we've got the logos, they're a little bit wider, so let's make this a little bit wider. So now we've got the logos that were pulled from GitHub in there instead of the just the manufacturer name. So let's go ahead and drag this guy down a little bit, and let's make this slicer wide enough so now that it's showing all of them. So if we click the Van Arsdal logo now, we get filtered on Van Arsdal. So we're looking at revenue by year, and that's an interesting enough visualization, but let's change that to a line and clustered column chart. So we were just a clustered column. Now we're going to be a line and clustered column chart. And we can notice down here underneath the fields list, we've got additional options for line values. And we want the percent growth to be a line. So if we take percent growth and drag it into line values, now we're looking at what the percent growth is over time. And if we take a look at the revenue card that we had created, it's good to have that number, but let's change that to a gauge, which if we look over under our visualizations, there, the gauge is right next to the card. So now we're looking at revenue as a gauge. We've built what we wanted to see, and now we're sort of tweaking it so that it gives us a better representation of how we want to present the data. So if we're looking at revenue here and we click on the gauge, let's go ahead and change the colors of this one because we've got a lot of blue going on. So at this point, I'm going to go back to the paint roller icon, click on data colors, and then the fill color, if I click the drop down, it'll let me choose a different fill color. Now, this is the default color palette under the bottom, and then there's also themes colors that you can choose from. So if I wanted to change it to purple, let's say, that's based on the themes. Themes inside of Power BI allow you to use a consistent color palette across multiple reports. And so if we go up to the View ribbon and we click on Themes, the list of themes that we have available to us are in this drop-down list. And right now, we're using this report is using the classic theme, but if we want to change it to, let's say, this is the default, Bloom, City Park Classic. Let's click the drop-down. We want to use the temperature theme. There it is. And we change that to temperature. Now you can see that everything on our report has been adjusted to work within the same theme. So in our scenario, the marketing department has provided some standard color themes to be used across reports. So we can import those themes. So if your marketing department or somebody builds themes for you, or you have somebody build them, we can import those so that all of your reports have the same look and feel because they'd be using the same theme. So if we're inside of View and we click Themes to get the drop-down, and we want to browse for themes. So I'm clicking Browse for Themes, and now inside of our dyad folder, inside of Data, there is a theme folder. And we're going to import dyad theme 2. So I click Open. That gives us dyad theme 2. The theme was imported successfully, and now we can click Close, and you can see that the different colors have been updated in the visuals that we have in place. So importing a theme is super easy. Creating the theme, a little bit easy as well. You can do it actually within Power BI and save a theme out. Yeah, if you've got a theme available for you, you browse for that theme, you select it, and then boom, you've got an updated theme for all of your reports. So it's super easy to make sure that there's a consistency across the visuals of all of your reports. So let's go ahead and make some more adjustments to this revenue visualization. So we've chosen colors, and by extending the data colors, we've done that. So we can also update the target, and you'll see that the color palette that we have available to us is different because now it's based on the theme. And we want to set the target to be black. Select black. So we want to set the target to be black. And we're done with the data colors. Let's do some adjustments to the data labels. Excuse me. You can see you can turn the data labels on and off. With the data labels on, we want to decrease the text size to 12. I'm just going to do that by clicking the down arrow, and now our text is a little bit smaller, so we can fit more stuff on the page. And if we expand the target selection, we've got similar options. We want to set the text size to be 10 as well. And let's do some tweaking to the matrix visual. So I'm going to click and highlight the matrix visual. So now inside of my paint roller icon, I'm working within the properties of just the matrix visual. So let's make sure that we're drilled up to the segments level. So there are categories. Here are segments. So we're looking at just our categories and our segments. And if we click the revenue by country visual, we want to drill up to country, so we're there. And if we click on data colors, let's make this a lighter shade of gray. Ooh. That one's a little bit too light. Let's go with a medium light. So now we've got gray. We've been able to manipulate this one outside of our themes. The themes aren't binding into what you can do with the colors. And if we look at here, we've still got our revenue by country selected, and our data labels are off. We want to expand data labels, and we want their display units to be millions. So now we're looking at how we can add additional labels to our visuals, and in this case we're adding a data label for the revenue by country, and we are setting that to be in millions just by simply selecting here. If we leave it on auto, the numbers are high enough that it's gonna go to billions, but we want to see it in actual millions. So there are a lot of formatting options, a lot of formatting options that can go on, and each visual has its own set of formatting options that can be used. So as we're looking at right now, a stacked column chart, that's got a different set of formatting options than, I guess they're still pretty similar to a clustered column chart. But if we look at what we can do on a matrix, there's a lot of different visuals in there. And you can change formatting, add borders, do all of that kind of stuff. There's just a lot of stuff that you can do inside of there. It's a little bit too deep for us to spend a lot of time in here. So it's one of those areas that, if you think you want to do it, you can give it a try. If not, you can go to the support forums and they'll be able to, usually somebody's already asked the question before and you'd be able to quickly get a solution to what you're trying to accomplish within the particular visuals. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and add a report title. I'm going to drag my revenue by year down. And so I'm going to go to the home ribbon and I'm going to click text box. So from the home ribbon, if you just want to add a text box, boom, here is a text box that you can use to do things. So I'm going to move my text box up. I moved revenue down. If I select my text box and drag you up, make you a little bit smaller this way and a little bit wider this way. And I'm going to call this manufacturer analysis. So this is going to be the name of our report, is manufacturer analysis. And when you're working within a text box, you've got the formatting options here. So I'm going to change this to bold, and I'm going to set the size to 36. Oh, that's a little bit longer. Let's go here, manufacturer analysis, and we can bring this guy in just a smidge so that they're not overlapping. And again, what I'm doing in resizing these things is when you highlight a visual, you've got little anchor points that you can use to drag the visual around, make it bigger, make it smaller, that kind of stuff. So I've just made the header a little bit bigger. So now I'm dragging my revenue by growth down. So we've got a okay enough title for right there. And if you're trying to get stuff organized and your grid and your snap to grid are turned off. So like right now I have grid lines turned on. They may be a little hard to see coming through the screen share, but if I turn grid lines off, there isn't any there, but I can turn grid lines on. And if you're really struggling with getting stuff to sort of line up and link, you can also turn on snap to grid. And when you're on snap to grid, the system will help you align. Also, when you're moving things around, you've got the red lines that will help you to determine, okay, this visual is lined up now on the right-hand side. If I move it to the left, I can align it with the left-hand side of the visual above it. There's also other ways to do alignments that we'll be getting into in just a little bit. So what we want to do at this point is we're going to rename this page because we're going to have multiple pages. And so down at the bottom where the page name is, I'm going to right click and choose rename. And we're going to rename this page to manufacturer. So now we've got a manufacturer page that we've created. We've renamed it. We can also use background images to format a report. So let's go ahead and pull in a background image so that we can help with formatting. I'm not selected anywhere. I've unselected all of my visuals. So now on the right-hand side under the paint roller, I'm looking at the page properties as a whole. So if we expand page background, and we want to add an image. And again, inside of our data folder, we've got the background image that we want to use. So I'm going to select the background. And I selected background. And what we want to do is we want the image fit to be fit. So we want it to fit to the screen. Actually, in transparency set at 100%. So we'll turn the transparency down to 0% so we can see what the actual page looks like. If your transparency was set to 100% on the background, just be sure to set that back to 0. So now what we're looking at is we've got this background image that we can fit our various visuals into, and the background image can help us sort of in that layout. So it's a template. So if you're following along, we're going to go ahead and resize these visuals and get them to fit in here in a way that sort of aligns with what we've got going on for the background image. So I'm going to bring my manufacturer analysis down, get it to kind of fit in there. And see if we can get the percent growth up. We want our revenue to be under. Let's go here, make that just a smidge smaller so that we got revenue there. We want our revenue and growth percentages and to be taking up a fair amount across the bottom. So let's set that this way. Our category, we want to fit that in the little box that we have here to the right. And revenue by country, we want to fit in this box. So let's make this a little bit smaller. So we're fitting mostly within what we're trying to do. Let's go ahead and add the logo. Let's make this a little bit smaller. We want the size to, let's go down to 24. And let's make it just a smidge smaller so that I can move it into about right here. And let's go ahead and add the logo to it. So there's our set. So the logo is transparent, so it'll fit in here very well. So we want to insert like we were doing with the text box, but this time we want to choose image. So from the insert ribbon, go ahead and choose image, and we want to choose the Van Arsdale logo. So now, like I said, the logo is transparent because it was designed to go in this space here in the upper left-hand corner. So that's why it comes in transparent and white. So now we've added the Van Arsdale logo, and it fits in there. Let's work on manufacturing analysis a little bit more. So we've highlighted manufacturing analysis, and if we click the arrow next to the A, it'll allow us to choose a font color. Let's make this one white as well. Let me highlight it all and then choose it as white. So now we've got that as white, and we want it to be 24. That's what we've set it to. And then on the background for this visualization, we want to turn the background off. So we're able to control the text and everything about the visualization using the bar that pops up. But when we want to get into controlling some of the properties that are common across all of them, we need to go back over to our visualization and turn off the background. So now we've got our Van Arsdale manufacturing analysis report, and our header information is all in there. So out of the box, Power BI has a large selection of visuals, but there may be a use case when you need to get a custom visual to meet your requirements. So the visualization engine is open source, and the Power BI community contributes visuals into the marketplace. You can add and use those visuals in your reports. Some are paid, some are free. It depends on what the people who created the report have decided to do with that. So what I'm going to do is walk you through getting a custom visualization. So in the right-hand side, where visualizations are, there's the ellipses, and the ellipse says Get More Visuals. So I'm going to click on Get More Visuals, and the Power BI Visuals app source opens up. And what we're going to get is one specifically called Play Axis. So I'm typing Play Axis in and hitting Enter. And it's not under Editor's Picks, so that the category has been chosen already. I'm going to switch to All, and there's Play Axis available. One of the things to note here is that the check marks next to it in the blue star, that image is used to identify certified custom visuals. So they're custom visuals that meet Power BI Team's coding requirements, and they become certified. Certified custom visuals support features like export to PowerPoint and the ability to display in subscription emails and things like that. If they're not certified custom visuals, then they typically can't be used in any of those external sources. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add. And now I've got a custom visual, this new visual icon. It's a little yellow circle with a triangle in the middle that is added to the list. So if we click, there it goes. The visual was successfully imported into the report. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm just going to click outside of any of the other visuals so that nothing is selected. And I'm going to click the Play Axis visual that we started with, or that we pulled in. So here's the Play Axis visual, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the date into this particular visual. So I'm going to go up to Date, and I'm just going to bring Date in, and now we've got Date in the particular visual. So let's go ahead and see what specific properties that we have available for this visual. And we've got general, we've got animation settings, and we've got colors. And we've expanded the colors, and I'm going to say show all. So now our visual is showing time information is what this visual does, and it can force your report to walk through different time periods. And so we've got what look like typical VCR controls, a play button, a pause button, and so on with this particular visual. So now that the visual is sitting in the place that we want it to be, what we've done is we've created this report. It looks how we want it to look, and what we're going to do next is we're going to use bookmarks to tell the story that we discovered with data earlier. So bookmarks capture the currently configured view of a report page, including filters and state of visuals, which will help you make it easier to present the data. So if I go up to the View menu, I want to turn on and view the bookmarks. I'm going to make visualization smaller, and I'm going to make fields smaller so that I'm looking at just our bookmarks panel. So I'm going to add a bookmark. I'm clicking the add button, and I've just added a bookmark in. And it adds the current state. So every filter that I have, all of that kind of stuff, it's all saved right now according to that filter. And I'm going to rename the filter to initial state. So I'm going to click the ellipse and tell it to rename, and I'm going to go initial state. So what I can do here is if I start filtering things, and let's say I'm multi-select and I've got stuff going on and I'm expanding, I've made a bunch of changes, I can click this bookmark and it'll take me back to where I was before. So it's a way to, if you get to an intriguing piece of information that shows well on the visuals, you can add a bookmark for it so that you can just click on that bookmark and it'll take you back to where you were. So we've added it, we've renamed it. Let's go ahead and go into the revenue by country visual, and let's click on USA. So I've clicked USA, so now we're filtered. And if we go over revenue by country, we can click on Spotlight. And what Spotlight will do is it will, sort of like when you're filtering a visual and it's filtering other visuals, you can turn on a spotlight onto a single visual and everything else grays out. So you're just looking at that one visual filtered as it was. So at this point, we're going to add another bookmark. And so now we've got a bookmark called bookmark 2. And if I go ahead and click on initial state and then click on bookmark 2, it's going to take us to how we were before. So let's go back to our initial state. And if we click on Australia, revenue by country, and click add, we'll get another bookmark that shows us Australia. And so if we go to view over here, so I'm going to go back to my initial state, everything's good. If I go to view, what'll happen is we're in the bookmarks view, and you can use the arrows down at the bottom to navigate through the bookmarks. So basically you can create what's like a PowerPoint slide in going through the various bookmarks. So if I want to make an update to a bookmark as well, if I highlight revenue by country, clicking on bookmarks 3, and I've got Australia, but I want to go into Spotlight, now I can go ahead and update this bookmark. Oh, sorry, I had to get out of view. I can go ahead and update this bookmark now. I clicked on it instead of clicking on the ellipsis. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the ellipsis and say update. So originally I didn't have revenue by country Australia highlighted or in spotlight mode. So now if I go back to my initial state and I go into view, and now if I use the arrows at the bottom to call it out, now I can call out Australia specifically. So we've created the bookmark pane, we've worked through it, and bookmarks are pretty valuable. It's a pretty interesting way to take a look at the data. Oh, let me turn bookmarks back on. And let me go back to my initial state. So now I'm back to my initial state. I could have just unselected Spotlight there as well, but I wanted to use that bookmark. So at this point, yeah, we've gone through all of those. We've created our first report. This is our first report page. It definitely could use some cleanup. You know, there's a little bit of cleaning that we could do. There's maybe some colors that we could work on, but this is essentially the first report. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I'm going to save it inside of my dyad folder, and I'm going to call it Lab 3. And now that I've saved, I'm going to close out. And so we've played with the visualizations, we've changed some colors, moved some things around. Like I said, there's a lot of customization that you can do to a visualization, and I'll be perfectly honest, I've been doing it for years, and I still come up with a like, oh, that can do that kind of a scenario as I'm working through the different properties. And also a second side of that is that Power BI gets updated monthly, a new version, and the development that they're doing in there is just, it's amazingly fast. So Power BI will auto update if you have it loaded as an app, say in Windows 10. But if you don't, be sure to go monthly or every other month and download the latest version, because they take the requests from the community very seriously, and they do a pretty decent job of making the updates that the community asks for and how a particular visual works. The only caveat to that is that if you make some really stringent documentation with screenshots, it may not last as long. So that's why I've stopped doing it that way, and I prefer to go to the Power BI community and the Microsoft documentation on the updates that they do, because they do all of that documentation for you, because buttons might change or names might change or things might move into different places. So now that we've gone through the visualization, how do we bring our story to life with the data? So once we're ready to publish the report and the visualizations that are within it to a broader audience, we do that through Power BI Service. So we can give Power BI users access to the richer data models and the reports that they create on their own. So there's cross-platform native mobile apps. So in addition to its rich web client, there are native Windows, iPhone, iPad, and Android apps that keep mobile users connected with their data wherever they may be. There's also team collaboration. It's enhanced with Power BI, integrated with Office 365. You can create Office 365 groups so that only the members of the particular group can view and edit specific reports and dashboards. You can navigate from Power BI to any of the other Office 365 workloads as you view conversations, documents, notes, etc. So all of the context of your work group, Power BI can live within, so that you're looking at the data with a single source of truth as well. There's also an option for Power BI Premium, which is a flexible content distribution model. If you're a large organization, then Power BI Premium might be the option to allow you to distribute your content to hundreds or thousands of readers. It's a slightly different licensing model from just the pro users, but you can also embed Power BI visuals in websites and blogs for public and anonymous access. So there's quite a lot of options in how you can bring your story to life with Power BI. So like I said, you can access your story with mobile devices, and we'll get into how to format those here in just a little bit.